Shalom. Giving all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders at Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations, as always, to the elect. News and prophecy, going into some things that are happening worldwide, as well as here in Babylon the Great, linking these things to the Holy Scriptures, giving a faithful elect an assurance, all right, that all of these things, all right, are in line with biblical prophecy and the will of the Lord, all right? So don't fret, all right? Wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability, all right, of thy times as the elect, all right, are rooted in faith, the world, all right, and those who are not written in the book of life, all right, are going to worship this system, all right, even if they're against, particulars, all right, that are going on and may speak out against particular things. All in all, they worship the beast. And their hope is that ultimately this system forwards itself, all right, with a ruler or leader that will actually benefit the people. And that's not going to happen, as this, global order that has been in place post World War II is collapsing. NATO, the EU, with Babylon the Great as the head. We're witnessing tensions. We're witnessing the dollar purposely be collapsed in preparation for a new world, new digital money, and the MOTB. All right. So in this lesson, we're going to deal with a few things that are happening that you are seeing in the news that they're trying to hide in the news, as Babylon the Great, is walking around with the stout look. All right. As we always go into in Daniel, the 7th chapter, which, foretells the revival of the ancient Roman Empire, in particular the ancient Western Roman Empire, which is the fourth beast here in Daniel 7 and 8 that will be revived via a little horn. And that little horn is Babylon the Great. All right. And it would have, all right, its vassals, all right, which are the 10 horns as well. Okay. And that speaks to the EU. And it's a beast system, right? The EU and NATO, headed by Babylon the Great, has dominated the earth. All right. And through it, all right, you have the revival of the ancient Western Roman Empire dominating the earth. And this is the rulership that will be in place upon the return of our Lord and Savior, Yahweh Shai HaMashiach. And that is foretold primarily in the book of Daniel, the 2nd chapter, Daniel, the 7th chapter, Revelation, the 13th chapter, Revelation, the 17th chapter, and various other chapters in the Holy Scriptures. And we'll just jump here to Daniel 7 and 20. Okay. It says, and the 10 horns which were in his head, speaking to the EU, which are subordinate, all right, vassals to Babylon the Great, which have aligned themselves, with the agenda of Babylon the Great, all right, pimped by Israel to dominate the world. When you look at what's happened in Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction, when you look at what's happened in Libya, when you look at what's happened, in all of these places they've invaded, the small hat has called the shots, and America has been used as the hammer of the earth by the elites, all right, accompanied by the NATO and the EU to just plunder, rape, rob, murder, steal. And it's been a dominant force in the earth that has been unfwittable up until the point where we are now, where this alliance is being broken up. All right. So it says, and the other which came up, okay, speaking of Babylon the Great, okay, because just like ancient Rome had its subordinate vassals that pretty much made it unfwittable, you can be outside of Rome and still get attacked by Rome. Well, the same thing, all right, is happening here today. But now Babylon the Great, all right, as it's being weakened, all right, is losing allies. And pretty much, all right, now countries that, wouldn't have ever stood up to Babylon the Great, the bully, are now doing it. Okay, because this place is falling. Babylon is falling. It's on its way out. Okay, it says, before whom three fell, all right, the Spanish, the French, and the British, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things. And we're witnessing some of the great things that they speak. All right, they present themselves as if they're gods through their science and their technology, but they're mere men. All right, they have the eyes represents, the fact that they're mere humans boasting in great things. Okay, their science, all of that. It says, in a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And the look being more stout than his fellows is leading to a shift as global leaders, all right, who were once subject to Babylon the Great via the dollar, all right, are dreaming of a U.S. free world order. See, under the leadership of Donald Trump, all right, America is losing more and more allies by the day. All right, even under Biden, this whole system is corrupt. Global leaders are dreaming of a U.S. free world order. Do they stand a chance? All right. Well, none of them stand a chance, because ultimately this whole NWO that they plan, whether it be outside of the dollar, whether it be this, or whether, these elites don't agree, but they're all trying to, enter into the MOTB infrastructure. None of it's going to work. Okay, the scriptures tell you here in Daniel, the 7th chapter, as a matter of fact, let's get that, because the determination is this, okay? Because this devil, all right, it says, and he shall speak, verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hands, into a time and times, and the dividing of times. Okay, but the judgment shall sit. So we've been given into his hands, all right, and basically he just had his way, you see. But after a certain amount of time, the judgment is going to sit, starting with us receiving this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and they shall take away his dominion to consume it and destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given unto the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve him and obey him. Who's the him? Yahweh Shai and his holy elect, starting with the 144,000, which the 12 disciples will be at the head of that. You see? So before the Lord returns, okay, this beast system will be undergoing, pursuing the Daniel the 7th chapter. And as we just read here in Daniel the 7th chapter, there will be friction and tension. Okay. And as we look throughout the news, all right, there's growing tensions between the U.S., Europe. All right. Of recent, we're seeing tensions with Canada, which we'll get into a few of these things, showing you that the beast is getting ready to hate the whore on a whole nother level. Okay. EU tensions in early 2026 are EU-US tensions, right? Because an example of his look being more stout than his fellows is all of these tariffs, right? Trump calls Supreme Court justices disloyal to the Constitution because he didn't get his way, right? And enacts a 10% global tariff by executive order. See? and he's receiving a lot of backlash, and we're going to get into some of that backlash. But this is just an example of his look being more stout than his fellows, that he can just put tariffs globally. All right, and there's a lot of backlash to it. You see now, U.S. EU tensions in early 2026 are high, driven by the return of Donald Trump's America First policies. See that? His look is more stout than his fellows in many ways, threatening heavy tariffs on European goods and disrupting security alliances. Okay? Particularly regarding Ukraine, key disputes include trade imbalances, digital sovereignty, and reliability of U.S. military protection, promoting Europe to seek greater independence. And as Europe seeks greater independence, they're going to have to ally themselves, all right, with particular countries that, all right, are enemies to Babylon the Great. Okay? NATO, all right, as of NATO America tensions, as of early 2026, U.S. NATO tensions are high, driven by the Trump administration's confrontational approach to European allies, right? The key issues include threats to seize Greenland from Denmark, demands for increased defense spending, right? And even with this push towards Iran, all right, that's going to put Europe in a bad place. See that? And they don't want that smoke, right? Trump threw out in his State of the Union that, you know, Iran could strike Europe if they wanted to. So Europe is watching. The EU countries are watching closely. Like, wait a minute, nigga, you bringing us into a whole nother beef? And it's and who's at the forefront of it? The small hats. All right, which their plan for a greater Israel is expanding beyond what they, and they never really agreed to a border, right? So pretty much they're going to continue and continue and continue, right? And pretty much now is creating all kind of friction where America is getting ready to lose all its allies and be drawn into World War III. This is where we are. All right, but they all agree upon the basis of the NWO, which is the digital ID, the MOTB. They all agree upon that. All right, but economically, all right, morally, and many other things they don't agree on. Trade wise, they don't agree. One wants to, win over the other. The other said, well, why you got to have this and you got to have that. Basically, Esau Edom is doing what he's always done, is fighting one another. Okay? Remember the Greeks and the Romans? Even the Greeks amongst themselves, the Romans amongst themselves, it was constant infighting. And a kingdom cannot continue like that. How do you think the kingdom of Israel fell? Okay? Infighting. All right? Pride. See? These actions have created a divorce narrative undermining trust and causing European nations to consider bolstering their own defense despite the necessity of the U.S. nuclear umbrella. So, all right, again, a lot of these European countries are going to align themselves with Russia, Iran, okay, because they don't want to get caught up in what America is drawing them into, okay? So we are witnessing, all right, the fall of, all right, the world order as we knew it, which Daniel, the second chapter, as we always get into, goes into it, all right? Now, before we get into more of that, let's get into a few videos, right, that are proof, all right, that the beast is getting ready to hate the whore, okay? And many nations, all right, are conspiring, all right, to trade outside of the dollar because of the pride and the stoutness of Babylon the Great, which is what this article is going into. And we'll get some videos and some articles, and hopefully you're edified. Okay, but this all speaks to biblical prophecy. Everything we're living through is literally in the Holy Scriptures. All right. And if the Holy Spirit is dealing with you, you can see it, as we've been blessed and anointed with the eye salve. Okay. Global leaders are dreaming of a U.S. free world. Do they stand a chance? And it sounds impossible. Okay. But for the purpose of prophecy and to push the beast to hate the whore, it will be attempted. Okay. Because let's not get simple here. The US dollar is still dominant, right? And these countries still rely heavily on Babylon in the dollar, all right? But they're pushing for opportunities outside of the dollar, all right, because of the economic pressure from Trump's tariffs and other things, okay? And the world being ushered in by Trump, all right, his look is more stout than his fellows. Power will prevail over cooperation. We will come to rule having taken this path. The Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, which, Canada is a part of NATO, okay? And basically they're morally decrepit, all right? They're involved in the same wickedness that the Epstein, they're involved in all of the same, carnage, all right? But Mark Carney, all right, inspired a wave of enthusiastic nodding among, all right, the cosmopolitan crowd gathered together in Davos last month when he took the podium and proclaimed that the world order underwritten by the United States, which prevailed in the West throughout the post-war era, was over. Okay, it's over. And we'll get back to this. Okay, let's go here. And now they're seeking to, make deals with the goods that they have, because America relies on Canada for particular things. Wood is one of them, I know. But Trump is like, nigga, we got our own wood. All right. But Carney heading on trade trip as Canada seeks to reduce reliance on US. Okay, so we're living in some very, very interesting times, man. Okay. Following threats of US tariffs on Canadian goods, Carney told President Trump that Canada plans to diversify its trade away from the US. Okay. And as a matter of fact, let's get this here in the book of Jeremiah 51:7. Babylon had been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. Okay. And these nations have committed fornication with Babylon the Great. Okay. As a matter of fact, let's get that in Revelation, the 18th chapter, in the 3rd verse. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And one of the main ways to commit fornication with this whore, okay, is by, buying into that dollar. That dollar is a big part of the fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. You see that? And Esau, Edom, all right, over here in the west, the Babylonian, the Edomite that controls Babylon has weaponized the dollar. And the nations are growing weary with it. Okay? Babylon have been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of our wine. Therefore, the nations are mad. All right? They're being driven out of their mind. See? Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. How for her? Take balm for her pain. All right? That's why Babylon has to continuously get bailed out, by the banks, by the IMF. All right. But that's coming to an end, and utter economic collapse is coming as the nations, all right, aren't so quick to buy American debt as they used to be. Okay. We would have healed Babylon, and we'll show you what I mean by that. But she is not healed. Forsake her and let us go everyone into his own country, for her judgment reaches unto the heaven. Okay, so as they're trying to enter into this NWO, all right, many nations are going to retreat, okay, and seek to do their own thing. Now, what I have here, let's go here. I had this video. Let's just play some of this, and then we'll get a few other videos.
The Trump administration is using a different mechanism to introduce these tariffs, but it has restrictions. They expire in 150 days unless Congress approves an extension.
We'll see what Congress does. This is more of a bridge than a permanent facility.
While most Canadian goods are exempt because of the trade pact with the U.S., the worry is Trump could broaden another form of...
Why would you put a tariff on a country you have a trade pact with? Like, you literally have a pact with them on trade, but then you put tariffs on them. Does that make sense? That's an example of him weaponizing the dollar. Okay, abusing his authority. Okay, his look being more stout than his fellows. Okay, and remember, you know, Canada is a part of NATO. Okay, so is Turkey. So NATO is getting ready to break up. The EU is clearly getting ready to break up and turn on Babylon. When it's all said and done, the small hat and Babylon are going to be left to their own demise.
The levy not struck down by the courts.
Unfortunately, the companies that are really hurting, the industries, the workers that are really hurting in this country are in sectors that are subject to a separate set of tariffs. That's automotive, aluminum, steel, lumber.
Also looming, Canada's trade deal with the U.S. is up for renegotiation.
I think we will eventually get there with the CUSMA deal. It's in the interest of all the parties, and it would be catastrophic for all if we were not to get to a deal.
February 23rd, 2026, Ottawa, Canada, 2:17 in the afternoon. A prime minister stands before his parliament. Cameras are rolling. Millions of people are watching live. And he says, with full composure, no hesitation, that the international order as we know it is dead. Not struggling, not under pressure, dead. And within 2 hours, the most powerful man on earth responds, not with diplomacy, not with a phone call behind closed doors. He responds with a 72-hour ultimatum to America's closest neighbor, America's closest ally, America's single largest trading partner on the entire planet. This is not a drill. This is not election season theater. The documents exist. The ultimatum is real. The clock is already running. Before we go any further, everything you're about to hear is drawn from documented policy statements, official government responses, leaked internal memos, and publicly available data.
And the majority of these channels are AI, but when you go into the, you know, these people, they're real people, but they create, this is the new wave where they create AIs of themselves telling the information. It's just the world we live in, but the information as you go into it is all true. Okay, this is just the world we live in, man. If you look up one day and see an AI, all right, you know it's over. All right, now we ain't gonna do that. All right, we gonna keep it real, but we use, you know, this is just the world we live in. You know, a lot of people be putting messages like, you know, this is AI. Oh, yeah, we know. Okay. But the information, you know, we can go and get a whole bunch of articles, right? But he's pulling out the receipts as well. All right.
This is analysis, my own analysis. You are free to disagree. You are free to form your own view. That is the whole point. Now let's talk about what actually happened, because mainstream coverage is giving you headlines without the ground underneath them.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing.
Donald Trump's marquee tariffs have already been deemed unconstitutional, but the White House is not backing down, initially introducing a new global 10% tariff, and now the president saying on social media, effective immediately, he's raising the 10% worldwide tariff to the 15% level and will issue new and legally permissible tariffs.
The policy hasn't changed, just the tools have changed.
And the ground underneath this story is everything. Canada and the United States share the largest bilateral trade relationship on this planet, nearly $750 billion, crossing that border every single year. Cars, energy, lumber, food, pharmaceuticals, it all moves back and forth in a system so deeply woven together that most Americans never think about it. They just assume it works. They assume the gas is affordable. They assume the car on the lot wasn't just hit with a massive overnight tax. They assume the lights stay on. That assumption is now in serious danger. Here's where this...
And who's this going to affect? It's going to affect the American people. This is going to bring about a collapse, and it's being done on purpose.
Actually started, not on February 23rd, not with the speech. It started weeks earlier, quietly, without cameras. Washington dropped a policy decision that Ottawa couldn't absorb. Unilateral tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, not proposed, not threatened, done, announced, effective. a sector that supports hundreds of thousands of jobs hit without negotiation. That was the first blow. Then came a second one, a demand that Canada dramatically increase its contribution to continental defense. Ottawa didn't see this as a partnership conversation. They saw it as a bill, a demand from a landlord to a tenant.
Ambassador Greer, can we just ask you, what's the status of talks with Canada right now?
So right now with Canada, they have a new chief negotiator that will meet our chief negotiator. I'm in contact with Dominic LeBlanc, who's Minister of Polish in Canada. We keep in contact. They express an interest in having some kind of alternative deal. Right now, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're quite focused on reshoring supply chains related to automotive, steel, and aluminum. Shipped 300,000 metric tons of steel more last year than the year before. And steel is Japan did last year for the first time in decades. That's what we're focused on. If Canada wants to come in and participate in the type of reshoring we're trying to do, we're happy to have those discussions.
And then, 3 days before the speech, a private memo arrived in Ottawa. The kind of memo that never shows up in press releases. The kind governments send when they want the message to land hard without a public paper trail. The memo reportedly gave Canada a binary choice. Stay aligned with U.S. foreign policy, on trade, on energy, on climate, or face the full consequences of choosing differently. The reported phrasing was not subtle. You're with us or you're against us. That was the final straw. Because here's what gets underestimated constantly in American political discourse. Canada is not a small, quiet, dependent country that does what it's told. It is the second largest country on Earth by landmass. It sits on top of some of the largest oil reserves in the world. It produces a quarter of the world's supply of certain critical minerals. Its freshwater reserves alone make it a strategic...
And again, with their oil, they following the tariffs, all right, as it says here, I just typed in Carney threatens U.S. with oil. It says as of early 2026, Carney has not directly threatened U.S. oil, but has focused on diversifying Canada's trade partners to hedge against U.S. economic pressure. All right. Carney asserted that Canadian oil will remain competitive despite U.S. policy change. All right. Because they're seeing Russia, all of the tariffs put on Russia. Russia ain't batting an eye. They're still winning. Okay, they're looking at what was going on in Venezuela. Okay, they were operating outside of the U.S. dollar and still, able to, win and trade and search out deals with countries that didn't try to get in all of their governmental, policies and this and this and that and dominate them. Because, the U.S. weaponizes the dollar, man. Okay? And this is why, as a matter of fact, let's go here real quick. We'll come back to this because Carney responded, right? He responded. Let's go here.
The video went viral across every major... What's truly at stake, how our institutions are faring, and the profound implications of our choices for the American experiment. If this analysis speaks to something you care about, the health of our alliances, the integrity of our institutions, the long arc of American leadership, I invite you to subscribe to this channel wherever you may be watching from, whether from Washington or Warsaw, from Ottawa or Ontario, from London or Los Angeles. Hit the like button and share this with someone who still believes that clear thinking matters. Now let us proceed. Carney read his remarks calmly and deliberately, straight from the page. He refused to take questions. He did not pause for reaction or applause. He said only what his nation, and indeed a considerable portion of the watching world, had been waiting months to hear from a Western leader. When he was finished, he folded his statement, turned away from the podium, and left without looking back. Within minutes, the video went viral across every major social media platform. Within an hour, world leaders had begun to respond. In less than 90 minutes, the President of the United States posted a series of messages on social media that transformed what was already a serious diplomatic crisis into something considerably more dangerous, a potential rupture between two countries that share the world's longest undefended border. What we are witnessing is not a trade dispute. It is not a diplomatic disagreement between adjacent nations that will be resolved with a handshake and a phone call. A connection that has shaped North American security, prosperity, and identity for 3 generations is being strained to its breaking point. Whether that connection can ever be fully restored, or whether February 20th, 2026 will be remembered as the day the American era in North America began to close, will depend on what transpires in the days ahead. To understand why Carney chose this particular moment, these particular words words and this particular manner of delivery, alone unannounced before the cameras of the world. One must examine the 24 hours that preceded it, as well as the wider consequences now unfolding for both countries. Early on February 19th, 2026, Toyota, one of the largest automakers in the world, announced that it was shifting $9 billion in planned investment from the United States to Canada. That single announcement shook American manufacturing communities. It financially and publicly validated everything Carney's government had been arguing, that Canada was presenting itself as a more stable, reliable, and attractive destination for international investment than an increasingly unpredictable United States under the...
There you go. Okay. Let's get Daniel 2. Daniel 2 and 40. In the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. This is what Rome was able to do. Okay, and America did it. And as iron breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and subdue, conquer. And that's what Rome was able to do. All right, whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, the revival of Rome. Okay, all right, the EU, all right, headed by Babylon the Great. Okay, as thou sawest the feet and the toes, part potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. They still have the sword, but the sword is divided. For as much as iron, as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, the miry clay, economically, trade-wise, they don't agree, okay, which is causing division and the breaking up of this system, all right? This is all the doing of the Lord. And the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken, and this is what we're witnessing, okay? Even the EU, just to get this real quick, okay, is reneging on certain trade here.
So let's bring in Scripps News International correspondent Ross Cullen live for us.
This is what I'm looking for.
There is more fallout from Friday's Supreme Court decision to strike down most of President Donald Trump's tariffs.
This morning, the European Union hit the brakes on ratifying a U.S. trade deal after President Trump threatened a new 15% global tariff. And over the weekend, multiple Democratic governors called for refunds for the billions of dollars the government collected while the tariffs were in place. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, a possible 2028 presidential candidate, even sent President Trump an invoice for nearly $9 billion. When asked about refunds on Friday, President Trump said, "We'll end up being in court for the next 5 years." NBC News senior business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins us now. So, Brian, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on Friday, President Trump now saying he's going to impose this blanket 15% tariff on all global imports. How would that work? And how does he have the authority to do that?
Yeah, and that's a big reason why markets are not doing that well today, because after the announcement that the Supreme Court had struck down the tariffs, many people were saying, OK, well, that's it, then. The tariffs are not there anymore, only to find out immediately afterwards that the president was going to pursue other avenues to reinstate those tariffs essentially at the same rate.
So Trump is all over the place. He's unpredictable. And these nations are growing tired of it. Okay? He's doing this to his own allies. Showing you the pride of his heart has deceived him.
So again, what we're talking about here is the president saying that he will go after any country that wants to retaliate here. He said that on Truth Social by saying, quote, any country that wants to, quote, play games with the ridiculous Supreme Court decision, as he describes it, will be met with a much higher tariff. And I think that's the threat that the markets are reacting to here. And the president even doubling down and saying, all right, well, the Supreme Court said that I don't have the emergency authority under their previous statute to stand up those tariffs, but he's still going to do it unilaterally. In another Truth Social post, he said, I don't need the help of Congress to do a lot of these tariffs. So yes, even though in the previous regime, prior to last Friday, we had seen things like a 34% tariff on China. We had seen a 25% tariff on Canada as well as Mexico. Those are gone for right now, but the president has now reinstated this 15% tariff. But I do want to point out that's only temporary. It's only going to last for 150 days. That's why that was the plan B to the president's plan A, which was just struck down.
And Brian, a lot of those posts from the president coming this morning, also this morning, European unions saying that they're halting this trade deal out of Brussels. What might that mean for Americans here at home?
Well, that trade deal that they had negotiated with the United States was prior to the Supreme Court decision. So you had the European Union that was saying, all right, well, let's have a deal here.
or we can do a 15% cap, for example, on things like pharmaceutical products, in some cases even lower, depending on most favored nation. Won't get into that. The United States was saying they would lower auto tariffs on European Union-made cars coming into the United States. But all of that is kind of moot because the tariffs that the European Union was trying to get around with that framework was shut down by the Supreme Court. So now the European Union is saying, okay, well, now instead of that, we're dealing with this new 15% 150-day tariff that makes the last framework a bit useless. Let's try to figure out where we go from here. That uncertainty you can copy and paste to every other country that's trying to negotiate with the United States. That's what makes this so complicated. And I think that a lot of analysts are still trying to figure out exactly where we go from here. One JP Morgan analyst saying over the weekend that the effective tariff rate, if you take everything, is basically the same as it was even prior to the Supreme Court decision.
Okay, Brian Sean.
You see, the dollar is at the forefront of him being able to do this. Let's get the book of Habakkuk. Beautiful times, right? Let's get Habakkuk chapter 2. Right? And there's other brothers who are able to explain this, more technically. All right. But you can clearly see that this is what the prophecies are talking about. We're here. Habakkuk chapter 2 and 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. So if he's doing this to his own allies, what you think he's getting ready to do to you people? All of this stuff is affecting you as well. All right. It says, yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home. He's all over the world doing wickedness, who enlargeth his desire as hell. Okay. And is as death. And now they want regime change in Iran. After that, they're going to go, Turkey. I mean, they're not going to stop. Okay. And the small hat is at the forefront of it. It says, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. All right. And the dollar has, been a big way for him to do that. Shall not all these take up a parable against him and a taunting proverb against him and say, woe to him that increaseth in that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. So there will be a parable against him. Shall they not rise up, and suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be booties unto them. Eventually these nations are going to strike. Okay? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for violence of the land and of the city, and all that dwell there. And he, all right, with this alliance, has been able to go around the world and just destroy, rape, rob, and murder. But the Lord is ultimately breaking up this alliance. Okay? And these countries are saying, how long? Okay? They're now saying, look, we can operate outside of the dollar. Okay? And you could check out these videos. I'm not going to play much of it, but you see here.
The ceasefire is not in the interest of Ukraine. Remember, the Ukrainians didn't want a ceasefire. The Europeans didn't want a ceasefire.
They now do. The Ukrainians now do.
Well, they want a ceasefire because they know that Donald Trump wants a ceasefire.
Europe is moving on from Trump's America, so everything we're reading is in the scriptures is happening right before our very eyes.
Hello and welcome to G0 World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and I'm coming to you from Munich, Germany, the site of the 62nd Annual Munich Security Conference, where our European brothers and sisters are nothing short of freaked out. Take the conference's theme this year, Under Destruction, a nod to political forces that favor demolition over reform, where the most powerful countries wield, and I quote, bulldozers, wrecking balls, and chainsaws. And in case you haven't figured it out already, the wrecking ball isn't coming from Moscow or Beijing. It's coming from Washington, D.C. Here's Germany's chancellor kicking off the conference.
The United States' claim to leadership has been challenged and possibly lost.
Challenged and lost, Mertz is saying, by the United States itself. President Trump's second term has cemented a unilateral, transactional American foreign policy. Allies are being forced to accept that the United States no longer sees itself as the guarantor of the global order it built, but instead is the principal disruptor of it. This didn't all start with President Trump. Across the G7, only a small proportion of citizens believe that their government's policies will make future generations better off. Trust in political institutions has been eroding for decades. And speaking of wrecking balls, last year's conference saw a newly elected Vice President Vance give a blistering speech informing the Europeans that there was a, quote, new sheriff in town and criticizing them for censoring far-right voices and failing to control migration.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
This year, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is representing the Trump administration, and he is striking a more, shall we say, diplomatic tone.
We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive.
But even still, there is a larger question hanging over this conference. As the United States under Trump is more focused on dominating the free world rather than leading it, who becomes its defender? The Europeans? The Canadians? The Gulf nations? The Japanese? I'm not hearing any convincing answers to that question.
Because they're all going to turn on Babylon the Great and destroy her, starting with the destruction of, where those small hats are at.
And if the world's democracies can't answer that question, will the Chinese and the rest of the, shall we say, less free world be happy to do so? I'm digging into all that and more with Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Funding for G0 World is
New kind of NATO. We're rebalancing between European and American responsibilities for defense and security in Europe. Timely, a good way. I would have liked to have seen it much more smoothly done than the way it was done, but perhaps the outcome is not going to be the worst thing at all. What struck me is that a year ago when we were sitting here, this was all about America. And now this meeting was all about Europe. What is Europe going to do? And what are the Europeans prepared to do? And it really wasn't any more about, are the Americans with us? It was sort of like, yeah, maybe, but we're going to do our thing anyway. And I think that's an interesting development.
And in some ways, it's a development that when you say you'd like it to be more smooth, I mean, you could take away, you wish that the Trump administration handled it more diplomatically, more collegially, but you could also say you wish that the Europeans had started doing this and having a serious way decades ago.
Absolutely. I mean, clearly, this rebalancing that is necessary is something that should have happened a long time ago. Europe, 80 years after World War II, part of an organization that was set up to give Europe the confidence to rebuild and regenerate, and which they did brilliantly through the European Union in a whole variety of ways. But really,
through rape, robbing, and murder. Now, let's go back here. Right, Daniel 2:41. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. Okay. We still have the sword, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. We're witnessing, all right, the broken aspect of it. Let's look up this word broken. Okay. And you can look up these videos. We're not going to play much more of them. Thabar, to break, to be broken in pieces, to be fragile. And we're witnessing, all right, how fragile, all right, and broken up this system is. All right, preparing it for Revelation, the 17th chapter, right, where, let's go here, all right. Revelation 17:12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which shall receive no kingdom as of yet, but shall receive powers as kings. All right, 1 hour with the beast. All right, the formation of the EEU, the EU. All right, the Treaty of Rome. All right, all of that. In post World War II, this order was formed. It says, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Okay. And for a while, this order worked, although they never fully agreed. They agreed enough to just dominate. And now we're here. Okay. Going to the point, verse 16, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, the EU nations, right? These shall hate the whore and shall make her desolate and naked and eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So they're going to join forces with Russia, China, Iran, a lot of these African countries. Ezekiel 38. Okay, another aspect of that is a lot of these European countries, as they reduce their reliance on Babylon because of the weaponization of the dollar and just being a bully and being more stout, they're going to, have to join forces with Russia. Because you think Europe wants to go to war with Russia and Iran? No. So you can't beat them, join them. Okay? Turkey, Germany, all these countries are ready. They're tired of Babylon. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast. until the words of Yahweh Bahashim Yahushua be fulfilled. So he allowed them to agree. All right. But at the very end, now they're divided. So Europe is moving on from Trump's America. Canada, we see all of this friction. Canada even threatened, with the oil. We saw that. Okay. And what this is all doing, all right, in the background is destroying that dollar. Okay.
23 countries, 72 hours. That is all it took to redraw the financial map of the world. While you were sleeping, while you were scrolling your phone, while the talking heads on cable news were arguing about the latest political drama, something historic was happening behind the curtain. 23 nations quietly signed bilateral currency agreements that cut the US dollar out of the transaction entirely. No press conference, no emergency summit broadcast on live television, just signatures on paper and handshakes in back rooms from Beijing to Brasilia to Riyadh. This is not a theory anymore. This is not some fringe idea from a podcast. This is a coordinated global exit from the dollar system, and it just accelerated faster than any economist predicted. The International Monetary Fund just released data showing the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has dropped to 56.92%. That number was above 71% in 1999. It has been falling for over 2 decades, but the speed of the decline in the last 12 months has sent shockwaves through every central bank on the planet. We are not watching a gradual shift anymore. We are watching an avalanche. If you have money in a savings account, a retirement fund, or a mortgage, this story is about your future. It is about the purchasing power of every dollar you earn and every dollar you save. And the scary part is not that it is happening. The scary part is that the United States has no plan to stop it. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. I track these global money shifts so you see the warning before it turns into a headline. This channel is your early detection system for the biggest wealth transfer in modern history. Also, a quick shout out to my partner channel. The BRICS Pay system is now operational. It is their answer to SWIFT, the messaging network that connects every bank in the world and runs almost entirely on dollar infrastructure. 90% of trade between Russia and the other BRICS nations is already being conducted in local currencies, not dollars, not euros, local money. China and India have signed rupee, yuan,
and remember, look these videos up and watch the whole thing too,
and trade agreements. Brazil is settling transactions in its own real. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil shipments. Think about that. The kingdom that built the petrodollar is now taking payment in Chinese currency.
But these nations are watching. They seen what happened, what was going on in Venezuela. They see what's happening with Russia. They're like, oh, okay. Even with sanctions and all of this, we can still trade and do our thing. All right. So they're reluctant, all right, to buy up that debt, take on that dollar like they used to be. Not that the dollar is not dominant, all right, but this marks a very, very important, all right, change. And this is how they're going to have to, war is on its way, okay? Trade wars, monetary wars, they eventually lead to physical wars, okay?
But it doesn't stop at BRICS. The Commonwealth of Independent States, a group of 11 post-Soviet republics, announced they are phasing out the dollar from their internal transactions entirely. These are countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and even Ukraine. That's right. Even Ukraine, while fighting a war partially funded by the West, has joined the movement to reduce dollar dependency. That tells you this is not about loyalty. It is not about politics. It is about survival. And the oil deals are the real knife in the back. For 50 years, there was an unwritten rule in global finance. If you wanted to buy oil anywhere on earth, you had to pay in US dollars.
There you go. You had to pay in US dollars, man. Okay? That thick clay. Okay? And this allowed him to dominate and even have his hands in some of your countries and how you move and this and that. This is why countries are like, well, shit, if I deal with China, they're not trying to control my government and make me do this and make me do that. So they're looking for ways outside of it. Okay? Again, what are some ways that America weaponizes the dollar? Okay, let's go here. All right, I said, why aren't nations buying up U.S. debt like before? All right, nations are still buying U.S. debt, but not at the same pace or enthusiasm as before. Several structural shifts explain why demand has cooled. Okay, that thick clay. Right, we just read in Habakkuk where ultimately they're going to take up a parable against him and say, woe unto him that increaseth in that which is not his, and him that ladeth himself with thick clay. All right. And that thick clay, right, is ibatyat, okay, which means heavy debts. Ibatyat. All right. And the petrodollar, all right, was pretty much dominant. Because if you want to buy coffee, if you want, tobacco, gold, you needed dollars. Oil, petrodollar was like you needed dollars. So that, even with the UAE, the United Arab countries, there was a deal made with them, all right, that if you sell your oil, all right, in dollars, all right, which made America rich on a high horse, we will protect you. Okay? And that ended, some like a few years ago. Although America still benefits off of the UAE, all right, they've joined BRICS, which of course the bankers are at the forefront of it all right, and we know some of it is theater, but it's going to lead to things trickling out of control for this devil because he thinks he's in control. Okay? So, going back here, U.S. debt, right? This is one of the reasons why nations are reluctant, all right, to buy U.S. debt like they used to. High U.S. debt and political dysfunction. Foreign governments worry about the long-term trajectory of U.S. finances. The U.S. debt has passed, all right, $34 trillion, right? Repeated debt ceiling standoffs and government shutdown threats raise default risk perception, even if actual default is unlikely. This makes some countries less willing to keep increasing exposure to U.S. state treasury, all right, securities. Weaponization of the dollar. This is the number one, in my opinion. After the U.S. froze Russian reserves following the Ukraine war, put all kind of sanctions on them, all right, embargoes, right? Many countries realize if we anger Washington, our dollar assets could be frozen. Okay? And good for Russia that basically they were still able to operate, right? Even with the sanctions. This pushed nations, especially rivals and non-aligned states, to reduce reliance on U.S. debt and dollar system. Examples: China, Russia, Iran, diversity away from treasuries, increase gold purchases and local currency trade. China is pulling back. All right. China used to be the largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries, but it's steadily reducing holdings because strategic rivalry with the U.S., desire to insinuate itself from sanctions, needing cash internally from economic support. China isn't dumping treasuries overnight, but it's no longer, all right, the backstop it once was. Higher U.S. interest rates, debt, that thick clay, all right, changed incentives. When rates were near zero, foreign buyers needed U.S. debt for safety. Now, higher rates mean existing bonds lose value. Currency risk is higher. Some countries prefer shorter-term instruments or alternatives. See? Ironically, higher rates help attract some buyers, but they also increase U.S. interest costs, worsening deficits. Okay? Other safe assets now complete. Other countries are diversifying into gold, energy assets, regional bonds, all right, strategic commodities, sovereign wealth investments. Okay? And the U.S. dollar was created to collapse. All right? Gold is all the most highest money is always going to find itself back up to the top. The U.S. no longer has a monopoly on safe haven status. All right. The Federal Reserve became the buyer of last resort. As foreign demand softened, the Federal Reserve stepped in through quantitative easing, balance sheet expansion. This kept markets stable, but it also signals that foreign appetite alone can no longer absorb U.S. borrowing. Okay, and then it goes more. Bottom line, nations are pulling back because the U.S. borrows too much The dollar has become a geopolitical weapon. Global power is fragmenting. Alternatives now exist. Trust is thinning, even if the system hasn't broken yet. The world isn't abandoning U.S. debt, but it is quietly preparing for a future where it no longer has to rely on it. Okay? I said, what are the other ways the dollar is weaponized? Okay? When people say the dollar is weaponized, they mean the U.S. uses its control over the dollar system, banking rails, and financial institutions to pressure, punish, or control other nations. The hammer of the earth, right? See, and we got to get Jeremiah 51, one of my favorite scriptures of late. Jeremiah 51, right? And 44, and I will punish Baal in Babylon. See, and we're finding out that these devils worship Baal, right? And I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he swallowed up, and nations shall not flow together anymore unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. So this thing is getting ready to collapse. Economic collapse is on the way, and it's being done systematically, all right, as a means to bring about this NWO. All right, but it's going to get out of hand for the devil according to the scriptures. Okay, his ill dealing is going to eventually be the downfall of him, because he's drunk off of his own pride, man. Okay. It says sanctioning via dollar clearing. This is one of the ways the dollar is weaponized. Most global trade clears in U.S. dollars and must pass through U.S. linked banks. All right, the SWIFT and all of that. This gives U.S. power to block transaction, fine banks, cut countries off from global trade. Examples: Iran, oil sales blocked, banks frozen; Venezuela, asset seized, dollar access cut; Russia, all right, post-Ukraine invasion sanctions, freezing foreign reserves. It says even non-U.S. companies must comply if dollars are involved. Okay, control of the SWIFT access. SWIFT isn't American, but it's Western aligned. Okay, so, I mean, we can go on and on and on, but basically they have weaponized the dollar to the point where nations are looking for ways outside of it.
It didn't matter if you were France buying from Saudi Arabia or Japan buying from Kuwait. You needed dollars first. This was the petrodollar system, and it was the engine that created artificial demand for our currency. It forced the entire world to hold our money just to keep their lights on. That system is being dismantled in real time. Saudi Arabia is now accepting yuan for oil. China is settling liquefied natural gas contracts in yuan. Russia is selling crude in rubles and rupees. Every barrel of oil sold outside the dollar is one less reason for any nation on earth to hold American debt. The petrodollar was not just a trade agreement. It was the oxygen supply for the U.S. economy. And someone just crimped the hose. Then you add the individual deals. India has set up special rupee Vostro accounts with at least 20.
Because another point of strength of the dollar is the sword, which now nations are no longer scared of America like it used to be. As a matter of fact, I want to just for that point alone, I want to play this real quick.
So I think that we're heading towards a period of massive tension in the Middle East. And as the Americans and Israelis become much more desperate, you have false flag attacks and you have more airstrikes. And the big question is whether or not Trump will use ground forces. Because if Iran were to close off the Strait of Hormuz, then Trump would have no choice but to send in ground forces. And that would basically initiate World War III, because it would draw in China, Russia into the conflict on the side of Iran. And then America would go all into Iran. So it's a very dire situation. I think, like, if you just read the signals, it seems that World War III is very likely, maybe not this year, but definitely very soon, either next year or the year after.
Confuse us, but what's the reality here? How much did Iran in particular, in terms of game theory, its own military capabilities play into this? You mentioned Starlink. That was a huge deal. And I tend to think that when you have planes in the air kind of scouting out the situation and then they don't do anything, they knew something was going to happen that wasn't going to go too well for the U.S. empire. What's your take?
Right. So first of all, Trump is first and foremost concerned about optics. So he is a reality TV star. He spent most of his adult life in the media, either as a celebrity being reported on by tabloids or himself being a reality TV star. He had a hit show called The Apprentice on NBC for over a decade, and it was really the #1 show on TV for the longest time. So he's really concerned about opinion, about creating optics that America is invincible. And that's why, for him, Venezuela was such a great success, because Delta Force was able to go in, extract Maduro, and there were no casualties. And that just showed America and the world that America is the most powerful military in the world. But if you look at the recent past, much more indicative example of American military power is Operation Prosperity Guardian. That's when the Houthis closed the Red Sea in protest of the genocide in Gaza. And America deployed this massive fleet to strike at the Houthis. And the Houthis, at this point, remember, they are poor. So their navy consisted of sailboats and fishing vessels. And you just saw the videos, Operation Prosperity Guardian. It is really impressive. You know, these warships backed up by helicopters and fighter jets. And everyone thought that, wow, the Americans are going to go in and smack the Houthis. And then they tried this for months and months, and they got nowhere because the Houthis refused to give up. And the Americans aren't actually used to fighting a war against an adversary who refuses to give up.
And that's what they found out about Iran. Okay, it ain't going to be that easy for us to roll up in there. Things are changing. All right, let's get that, the weak. Let the weak say I am strong. Joel 3:10. All right, now through different deals and countries aligning themselves, and Russia being a guard unto a lot of nations, right? Joel 3:9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, and let them come up. Okay, the bully is now being challenged. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. See that? Let the weak say, I am strong.
They're used to shock and awe. They're used to scaring people and intimidating people with the display of their military might. And the Americans refuse.
They're used to scaring people. And that's another aspect of the dominance of the dollar, is that sword. But now everything's divided. They're losing allies. And now countries you never would have thought would scoff to the U.S. Standing up to her.
To take casualties. So they didn't send in ground forces, and the Houthis were able to, I believe, even sink an American ship. So it was a disaster for the American military. And, there was this huge debate among American military as to what to do. You actually watch these panels. They're actually on YouTube. You'll hear these 4-star generals and admirals go on and say, we recognize the limitations of American power in the Red Sea. We're not willing.
Especially abroad. Because, again, just like Rome, America is stretched too thin. Okay, so they're starting to see, as we are abroad, disrupting and stealing and raping and robbing and murdering. All right, now particular allies we thought we had, aren't helping us in these regions. All right, i.e. Saudi Arabia in that region, those particular countries, Arab countries, are banding together saying, nah, we're not allowing, Israel to use these bases to, move, to push towards Iran. Okay.
To make sacrifices. We're not willing to accept casualties. We want a cheap and easy win. And so we need to reflect on how to improve. And then someone in the audience asks, well, what are you going to do? And the response has always been, well, we'll think about it. And then the next question is, what are you going to do that's going to be different? And the generals and admirals were like, nothing. Well, we're going to keep the course. So that's the state of the American military. The American military is not in a position to win a full-scale war against an adversary that's willing to fight back. They definitely can't win a war against Russia. And we know that because of what's happening in Ukraine. They can't even win a war against the Houthis. And so, this war against Iran will be a disaster. And Trump sort of knows that. So he's trying to hold this off as much as possible. At the same time, because of the nature of empire, you're committed to fighting this war. And the reason why is that the way to control public opinion, the way to control the globe as an empire is through intimidation, through the fact that we can strike at you at any place, at any time. They were able to do that with Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Who's at the forefront of that? The small hat.
in 2003, shock and awe, that intimidated the entire world. But then in 2022, the Russians attacked Ukraine and the Americans were not able to stop them. Now the aura of American invincibility and inability has dissipated, and America needs to reestablish this by taking on Iran and showing that America still has what it takes. Okay,
that's when they're going to be drawn into something they don't want.
Number one. Number two is that geopolitically, Iran is the pivot point of the world. It always has been. And the great fear is that Russia, Iran, and China will link up together and create a trade pact that can negate American sea power. So basically, Russia, Iran, and China, through the BRICS, is able to trade within themselves. They use their own currency called the unit. And China is able to build railways connecting Eurasia with Africa. And then basically the entire American Navy is negated. America is blocked out of this trading block. And the American economy collapses because the American economy is a Ponzi scheme. So for a variety reasons, the Americans have absolutely no choice but going to Iran. If they let Iran as it is, then China and Russia control basically the entire world. And so America is stuck where it is. It can't win this war, but it has to fight this war anyway. And how do you...
Let's get it. The hammer of the earth. Get a few more and we'll close it out. A few more videos. Now the hammer, all right, through its ill dealing and the loss of allies, right? It's the book of Jeremiah 50 and 22. A sound of battle is in the land and of great destruction. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation among the nations? I have laid a snare for thee, and thou art also taken, O Babylon. And that snare is the small hats getting your ass involved, and through your pride getting involved in this Iran thing, okay? Because they want control of all of these regions. They want control of the whole so-called Middle East. They want control of all of this. They're not going to stop, right? He can never have enough. And see, and thou was not aware, thou art found and caught, because thou hast striven against the Lord. The Lord have opened his armory and have brought forth his weapons of indignation, for this is the work of the Most High in the land of the Chaldeans. Come up against her from the utmost border, open her storehouses, cast her up as heaps, and destroy her utterly. Let nothing be left. So all of these nations are getting ready to band together to come against Israel, which is going to draw America in to be, annihilated. All right. But as we see before that, strategic things are happening to weaken this place, all right, from the inside out.
26 countries, allowing trade to be settled in rupees without touching a single US dollar. Bangladesh just paid Russia for a 1.4...
And don't get it twisted. When Babylon falls, that's going to disrupt the whole world markets. That's when they're going to be casting dust upon their heads, right?
Gigawatt nuclear power plant in Chinese yuan. Not dollars, yuan. And Bangladesh does not even border China. France, a NATO ally, settled a liquefied natural gas deal in yuan. South Korea and Indonesia are expanding local currency swap lines. Argentina has been paying for Chinese imports in yuan since 2023. Add it all up. 23 countries made concrete moves to bypass the dollar in a single 72-hour window of coordinated agreements. This is not noise. This is a signal. To understand why this is happening now, you have to understand the weapon that started the war. In 2022, the United States did something that changed the game forever. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies froze over $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves overnight. They flipped a switch and made Russia's money disappear. It was an unprecedented act of financial warfare. It worked against Russia, but it sent a message to every other nation on earth. Your dollars are not really yours. They are a permission slip from Washington. If you step out of line, your money can vanish with a phone call. China took notes. India took notes. Saudi Arabia took notes. Every central bank in the developing world looked at what happened to Russia and asked the same question. If they can do this to a nuclear power, what stops them from doing it to us? The answer was nothing. And that realization triggered the biggest shift in global finance since the end of World War II. Nations began converting their dollar reserves into something that cannot be frozen by a foreign government. They started buying gold at a pace the world has never seen. Central banks purchased over 1,000 tons of gold in 2023 alone. Woo! China has been buying gold for over 28 consecutive months. They are not doing this because they think gold is pretty. They are doing it because gold is the only asset on earth that doesn't come with a counterparty risk. It does not rely on a promise from another government. It cannot be sanctioned. It cannot be hacked. It cannot be deleted with a keystroke. The World Gold Council data...
It's not a debt. It's backed by... It's gold. Remember, the dollar used to be backed by gold. silver.
Confirms it. Central bank gold purchases have been running at historic levels for 3 consecutive years. This is not speculation. This is a verdict. A world central banks are voting with their wallets, and they are voting against the US dollar. Now here is where this hits your kitchen table. Every time a country stops using the dollar for trade, it removes a layer of demand for our currency. For 80 years, the dollar has had an unfair advantage. Because everyone needed dollars to buy oil, to settle trade, to hold reserves, there was a permanent global demand for our money. That demand allowed the US government to borrow at absurdly low interest rates. It allowed us to run massive deficits without consequence. It was like having a magic credit card with no spending limit. That magic credit card just got its limit slashed. When demand for the dollar drops, 2 things happen simultaneously. First, the value of the dollar weakens. A weaker dollar means everything you import costs more. Your electronics, your clothes, your car parts, your coffee. The price of living in America goes up.
And this is going to lead to more perplexity to you, to the American working class. The ones who, are responsible for going and buying and going to these restaurants. Restaurants are empty, get closing down. Okay, tourism is down. Nobody is buying anything or going anywhere because they're trying to hold on to the little savings they have. This leads to a depression. Okay, and it's only going to get worse. Okay.
Because companies are greedy, but because your money buys less on the global market. Second, and this is the one that keeps economists up at night, interest rates rise. The US government has a $36 trillion national debt. It runs a $2 trillion annual deficit. That means it needs to sell roughly $2 trillion in new bonds every single year just to keep the lights on. For decades, foreign governments lined up to buy those bonds. China bought them, Japan bought them, Europe bought them. The demand was so high that the government could borrow cheaply. But if 23 countries are actively reducing their dollar exposure, who buys those bonds? The buyer pool is shrinking at the exact moment the supply of new debt is exploding. That is a collision. When there are more bonds for sale than there are people who want to buy them, the government has to offer higher interest rates to attract buyers. And those higher rates ripple through the entire economy. Your mortgage goes up. Your car loan goes up. Your credit card rate goes up. Your small business loan goes up. It is a hidden tax on every American that nobody voted for.
Yep.
If this is making sense to you, hit that like button right now. Seriously, the algorithm decides who sees this information. If you think more people need to understand what is happening to their purchasing power, one click changes who this reaches. Now, let me explain the part that nobody in Washington wants to admit. The Federal Reserve is losing control. We are taught that the Fed controls interest rates. That is a half-truth. The Fed controls the short-term rate, the overnight lending rate between banks. But the long-term rates, the ones that determine your mortgage payment and your business loan, those are set by the bond market. They are set by supply and demand. The Fed could hold a press conference tomorrow and slash rates to zero. It would not matter. If the bond market does not believe the U.S. can manage its debt, long-term rates will keep climbing, regardless of what the Fed does.
All right, so you can check that video out. All right, let's go to this one and get a few more. We'll close it out.
As your friend, I just want you to know that the US dollar is collapsing.
Our president just said that he's excited and or okay with the fact that our dollar is getting weaker.
The US dollar just sank to its lowest level in 4 years, and here's what's actually going on.
Terrible breaking news. The banks are literally running out of money.
Right now, the U.S. dollar is quietly losing its grip. Most people have no idea how fast things are moving. Gold is surging, banks are scrambling, and countries around the world are making moves that should have all of us paying very close attention. Let's look at what people are saying about this.
It's the beginning of the end of the monetary system as we know it. It's not just the U.S. dollar, it's the fiat monetary currencies. So the UK, the euro, Japan, China all have similar debt problems and so on, and are dealing with the same interrelationships, which is the reason you're seeing gold being chosen by the central banks. They want a currency. Gold has always been the main currency, and it's the only non-fiat currency. In other words, not the currency that can't be printed, that they want. And so that's why you're seeing central banks move and sovereign wealth funds move to gold, and that's the nature of the shift of the monetary system.
So you're telling me that while everyone's distracted by the news cycle that's going on, the people who are paying attention are witnessing the beginning of a complete global financial reset in real time. Gold hit over $5,000, silver passed over $100, and the dollar itself is quietly collapsing. But crypto, the one asset designed for this exact moment, is being suppressed until new regulations pass. Now, the elites know what's coming, stable coins to maintain dollar dominance, CBDCs for more control, and
stable coin, which remember Trump said he wouldn't bring about a central bank digital currency, but then he secretly brought about that stable coin. All right, which is nothing but a central bank digital currency. All right, with some chocolate on top of it. And the Elder Ariala is very good with this topic, so I'm pretty sure he'll go in. At camp, we'll probably talk about it. But you know, you could check this video out. I mean, this is a beautiful time. I mean, wow. Wow. You know, call halal Yahweh Bashim Al Shai. All right, for let's play this as well. You can watch this video. All right, the banks are running out of cash. Let's see. Little white man with a suit. See what he talking about.
Reimagine the U.S. economy and our relationship with plenty of our trading partners. They have a four-step plan as to how to do this. The first is that they want to use tariffs to increase revenue. The second thing is that they want to weaken the U.S. dollar to offset the tariff impact. The third thing is they want to deregulate and create tax cuts to actually drive growth. And the fourth thing is that they're hoping that innovative technologies like artificial intelligence will drive a deflationary force into the U.S. economy. The end result of this is that we get a high-growth, low-inflation economy, and that means that asset prices are going to go up. Now, whether you like the administration or you don't, that's the economic policies that they're pursuing. And if they end up being successful, that means that the dollar is going to weaken, your savings will be depleted, and anyone who's an investor is going to benefit. So the thing that you need to do is become an investor, because in today's economy, investors are winners and savers are losers.
Our president just said that he's excited and or okay with the fact that our dollar is getting weaker. But what does that really mean? So historically, the US dollar has always been known for its strength, meaning that one US dollar can buy more than one of a different currency, say the Japanese yen. So a weaker dollar implies that you buy less abroad. But who would want that? The answer is mainly US exporters. When the dollar becomes weaker, it's less expensive for foreigners to buy American products, and therefore our exports can increase and in turn shrink the trade deficit. This boosts sales for American companies and corroborates his America First policy. Weaker dollar can also contribute to something like inflation, because if imported goods are rising, that can be translated into the CPI. But for me and you, things we might notice are increased prices on imported goods, as well as increased price on travel outside of the country to, say, Japan or Europe. And an important caveat to this argument is that the US currency is currently the global reserve currency, meaning there are already governments and central banks that are designed to hold dollars and inclined to do so. This can artificially inflate the demand for US dollars, making it appear stronger than it really should be on paper.
Most people have no clue. And it's so important because it's directly going to affect you, especially if you are in North America. I mean, it's going to affect the whole world, but especially if you are in America and in Canada, you need to know what's going on with the financial system. You just need to know. So let me do my best to break it down. What is happening is that the U.S. are trillions of dollars in debt, right? You probably know that. Well, they want to erase their debt. And there's many plans in order, and we've heard of Plan 2030, and you maybe know that there's some stuff going on, but most of us don't really have any clue. So what is happening is that, and this is already being passed. This is not a theory. This is actually happening. We saw it with what Trump just passed in the Genius Act. We know that Trump and these big players are buying up all this crypto. But what is happening is that they have created these stable coins. And I know there's going to be like, oh, this crypto talk, but just stick with me because it's important. I'm going to tell you actionable things of what you want to do. So they've created stable coins, which is like a crypto coin that's tied to the dollar. They are going to switch the regular US dollar into these stable coins, into this digital crypto type of.
See that? That chip is coming, man.
Coin. And then the value of those stable coins, say it was 100 US to 100 stable coin, 100 in stable coin. They're going to drop the value of the stable coin. And essentially what that is going to do is it's going to seem like they're wiping out a huge majority of their debt. But what's going to happen then is that the US dollar is going to completely tank. Essentially, they are deflating the US dollar. And everybody that's not aware of what's happening or not diversifying is going to get wiped out.
The United States just quietly passed a bill that legalized.
And what does that mean, wiped out? Basically, you're gonna be in hell, and you're gonna have to accept whatever solution they bring about.
And legitimizes digital dollars. In the last couple of days, Donald Trump just signed the Genius Act. And the Genius Act does 5 different things. 1, only approved banks can issue stablecoins. 2, they have to be backed 1-to-1 by US dollars or treasury bills. 3, they have to offer daily audits and allow you to redeem for real cash. 4, big players get audited by the Fed. And 5, they're not considered securities, so it's way easier for companies to adopt them. Because of this act, in theory, you could pay your rent, tip your Uber driver, or transfer money to a family member with no fees instantly. You wouldn't need a bank account. All you'd need is your phone. It would give other people in undeveloped countries access to the US dollar. It could very well make Ethereum the backbone of finance. It opens the door to Ethereum ETFs with staking rewards, hello passive income. Ultimately, you may not care about cryptocurrency and you might even think it's a scam, but it just became legal tender whether you like it or not. And it's not coming. It's already here. What do you think? Do you think this act is genius?
Now, when you hear the actual policies being laid out, the weakening of the dollar, the digital currency push, it's hard to call on any of this as an accident, right? I'm curious what you think about all this, but regardless of what's behind it. Regular Americans, they're already feeling it. Every single trip to the store reminds you.
The dollar loses its value by 2% every single year. And that's what we're told, but that's not true. Since 2020, the US dollar has lost 19% of its value.
All right, so digital money is around the corner now. A few, more false flags, they can bring about a system, a collapse that will force you into what they are trying to bring, man. So, here's one more I wanted to show.
So first video, because I had 3 more, but I think I'm gonna play this one too, that I want to touch on and then go into the scriptures behind.
GMS Maccabean Spirit. You see the title of the video.
The proud people of America, the greatest country on earth. Everything is collapsing in your country. You have now become a laughing stock, where 1% is getting richer, and the remaining percentage is getting poorer. Some citizens are walking around the streets of America like zombies due to drugs. You cannot continue to live like this. It's not fair on you and your children. We are the greatest producers of eggs. For 200 years, you have been denied human rights, freedom of speech. Don't let your leaders get away with it. Be brave, dare to dream. This is your time, American people. It is your time. Seize the opportunity. We can help you if you want. With good food, which will prepare you for freedom. Good drinks, which will prepare you for freedom. Good luck, American people. You deserve better.
Truthfully, America deserves exactly what it's going to get, because these same people have allowed pedophiles and, to do horrific vampire type things to children and women and people, the hangings and murders, the sacrifices, and it's all come out now.
That's it.
So there's no fixing Babylon.
States is not invited. I need you to understand what just happened, because while every nations, 1.5 billion people, $30 trillion, and the United States is not invited. I need you to understand what just happened, because while everyone was watching the Supreme Court, while the House was fighting over tariffs, while Trump was threatening to block bridges and pick fights with allies, something massive was quietly taking shape on the other side of the world. And today, I can finally tell you exactly what it is. The European Union and the Trans-Pacific Trade Bloc just launched formal negotiations to build the largest economic partnership in modern history. Nearly 40 countries, stretching from Tokyo to Berlin to Ottawa to Singapore, are now actively working to connect their economies in ways that would fundamentally reshape global trade. And here's the part that is by the White House. They are doing it specifically to bypass the United States. But here is where it gets complicated. This is not some vague diplomatic gesture. This is not leaders posing for photos and making empty promises. Reports confirm that the inaugural EU CPTPP trade and investment dialogue has already taken place. Ministers from all member nations gathered to establish working frameworks across 5 key priority areas, including trade diversification, digital trade, supply chain resilience, and reform of the entire global trade environment. Now, what I am about to show you changes the whole picture, because at the center of all this stands Canada, not on the sidelines, not as a junior partner, at the center, leading. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before world leaders at Davos last month. He did not mince words. He told them directly that we are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. He said great powers are using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. He was describing American policy under this administration without ever saying the name. And then he announced exactly what Canada intended to do about it. He said Canada is championing efforts to build a bridge between the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European Union, a new trading bloc that would represent 1.5 billion people. He said middle powers must act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. That was not rhetoric. That was a preview of what was already happening behind closed doors. Documents reveal that Canada has been spearheading these discussions for months. Officials confirm they have had productive conversations with partners around the world. Japan has already signaled strong interest. European trade officials are describing themselves as super keen to pursue this deal. Wait, it gets worse. For America, let me break down exactly what this alliance would actually do and why it represents the most significant shift in global trade architecture since the creation of the World Trade Organization. The core mechanism at the heart of this alliance is something called cumulation through shared rules of origin. Now, that sounds technical, but let me explain why it matters. Right now, the EU and CPTPP operate under separate trade rules. If a Japanese company builds a car part, ships it to Germany for assembly, then wants to sell that car in Canada, it faces layers of bureaucracy at every border. Different rules, different tariffs, different compliance requirements. Supply chains get fragmented, costs get passed to consumers. But here's what nobody is talking about. If these two blocs agree on shared rules of origin, a product made with components from any member country would qualify for preferential treatment across the entire partnership. Japanese parts in a German car sold to Canada, seamless. Vietnamese textiles processed in Italy for the Australian market, no barriers. Supply chains would flow freely across nearly 40 countries. This is what supply chain resilience actually looks like. Not dependence on one country, not vulnerability to one man's social media posts. The diversification across dozens of stable, reliable trading partners. Now, let me tell you why this is happening right now, because the timing is not accidental. When Liberation Day tariffs launched last April, duties ranging from 10 to 50% hit imports from nearly every trading partner. Emergency powers that 2 courts have since ruled exceeded presidential authority were used to fundamentally alter the global trading system. Yep. The Supreme Court is expected to issue its ruling on the legality of these measures any day now. Justices appeared skeptical during oral arguments that such sweeping tariff authority exists under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. But here is the part.
Yeah, I'm doing a lesson.
The damage to America's reputation as a reliable partner has already been done regardless of what the court decides. Companies that built their supply chains around American trade suddenly found themselves paying tariffs they never expected. Countries that negotiated in good faith saw their deals threatened with termination overnight. The message the world received was clear. If you build your economy around the United States, you are vulnerable to chaos. You are vulnerable to unpredictability. You are vulnerable to policies that change with a single post on social media. Carney saw this coming before almost anyone else. At Davos, he laid out the alternative. Diversify, rebuild sovereignty, unite the middle powers. Do not wait for a world you wish existed. Take on the world as it actually is. And that is exactly what is happening now. 40.
Like my man says, my brother, Yasharala, rejoice. This is it. The beast is against the whore. The beast has officially turned on the whore. All right? The beast system that the whore rode upon is now going to turn and eat that bitch. All right?
Daniel 4. All right. And 42 and 43. Daniel 2 and 43. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. All right. Make alliances with one another. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. All right. And through, marriages, this European system was built. All right. That was one of the aspects. NLT, the mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms would try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage. Right? This is how early Europe was built. But they will not hold together. These different pacts with NATO as well. Right? But they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. So we're witnessing a kingdom divided, Egyptian against Egyptian. All right, all-out war is on its way. All right, and prophecy is being fulfilled, man. So, banking chief says EU must wean itself off of Visa and MasterCard. Okay. Trump warns Canada and UK against doing business with China. So we're here, man. Oh, man. Yeah. I don't know, man. You Edomites, you're the scum of the earth and you're through. When it's all said and done, you were through. All right. And the end all be all of this, all right, we'll finish off here, is Daniel 2 and 44. And in the days of these kings, when all of this is happening, what's next? The God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, man. And it shall stand forever. Okay? For as much as thou sawest the stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, the return of Yahweh Shah, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, and the great God have made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof. So the dream that is being broken down here is happening right before our very eyes. And our forefather Daniel broke this down. And now we're living in a time where it's happening. So again, you can look up all those videos that I went into, because there's more. Hopefully you brothers and sisters were edified. This is the reason that we do these lessons. All right. Shalom. Call Halal Yahweh Bashim Shai.